Welcome. I'm Alfred Webre, and today is June 14th, 2011, and we're privileged again to have our Fukushima radiation update, along with other matters, with independent scientist Leuren Moret coming to us from Berkeley, California. Welcome, Leuren.
Thank you.
Okay, so as I understand it, the highlights of this update will be Mega-tsunami, total melt-through, that's a new concept, radiation levels, and radiation illnesses, and maybe all the number of hot particles people in the Seattle and other areas in the U.S. are ingesting a day. Inhaling.
Even worse.
Okay. Well, walk us through this update.
On June the 13th, 2011, NHK, which is the Japanese main news outlet television network, announced that the tsunami that hit the northern coastline on the east side of the island of Honshu, the main island of Japan, and caused the disaster at Fukushima partly, actually was over 40 meters high in Miyako, which is a bay or a city, a port, close to Fukushima. That's 133 feet high.
Wow. How does that compare, for example, with the Boxing Day 2004, December 26, 2004, Indonesia tsunami that killed 200,000 people?
It was actually very similar. Now, what's interesting is
but
that...
I mean, what, was that tsunami 133 feet high?
It was approximately that high, yes.
Okay.
I believe. I would have to check to be sure.
So that may have been a heart tsunami also.
I think most definitely it was. And what I did is I went back through the historic record. Two other cities also received very large tsunamis. Noda was one that was 124 feet. These are different bays or ports along the northeastern coast of Japan in the vicinity of Fukushima and the earthquake. And Onagawa received 114-foot tsunami. So we're seeing tsunamis that have never been reported in Japan before in 1,200 years. So this is another signature of HAARP. And the island of Krakatoa, a volcano in Southeast Asia, in 1883 actually exploded and then collapsed into the ocean, which these volcanoes in the ocean sometimes do. They have in the Hawaiian chain. And the Krakatoa collapse created or caused a natural tsunami of 135 feet. But we're talking about...
So that's comparable to the tsunamis that were caused on March 11th, 2011 at Fukushima and neighboring cities, and on December 26, 2004, in the Indonesia Boxing Day earthquake.
Yes, and that was the Krakatoa collapse, and the tsunami was natural. So we do know that it happens in nature, but Krakatoa was a huge volcano. It was a whole island. It was a tremendous landmass to just collapse so quickly, and those have been studied around the Hawaiian Islands once the bathymetric maps that the Navy had classified so that scientists weren't able to study it. They are now declassified, and scientists have actually discovered and reported that whole volcanoes have disappeared, or half of volcanoes missing, half of the volcanoes missing on some of the islands.
Wow.
Now, there was one other wave. I don't know if you would call it a tsunami. I guess you would, but it was let's say, a mega wave event in Lituya Bay, Alaska, in 1958 on July the 9th. And this happened in a fjord, and that's where a glacier scrapes out a channel into the ocean, and very narrow, and they are U-shaped on the bottom. And Yosemite's a good example of what fjords would look like if there was no water in them. And that produced a 1,700-foot wave. I don't think that's ever been announced anywhere. And it's very interesting that it was in a very narrow fjord. They attribute it to a landslide of rock piles that fell into the water. But it's very strange. It was investigated almost immediately by Los Alamos and UC Berkeley, and they did modeling and so forth. And that is probably because this may have been an early HAARP experiment. And I believe that's what caused it. And they picked that particular geologic setting to do their experiment. Well, boy, it sure worked. 1,700-foot wave in a little tiny fjord. It just cleaned out all of the trees up to 1,700 feet. All the soil, washed it all away.
And what was the date of that again?
That was July 9th, 1958. And remember...
1958?
Yes.
So that was the year after 1957, which is the year in which the Jason scientist published his book about using environmental weapons to destroy the environment.
That's
that interesting?
Correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
And that should be the strategy that the U.S. should adopt to destroy the environment as a weapon of war and thereby take over the planet.
Well, the Soviets
1957 and in 1958, they create a standing wave of 1,000. What was it?
700 feet.
1,700 feet.
Yes.
Right.
Look
at what we can do. A demo.
A demo. Exactly.
A demo. Probably to get for future funding, right?
Of course. And also, what happened is between the 1950s and about the 1980s, there were a number of very large events, tectonic events around the world. And I believe those were HAARP. We've gone over those before in our interviews, so I'm not going to mention them right now. But what's most interesting is in the report I read related to this mega-tsunami, is that there were small tsunamis and earthquakes triggered. This is at the plate margins around the Pacific Rim of Fire. There were a number of them which were unusual and too frequent to be a normal pattern. And so they were doing demos around the Pacific Rim at these plate margins, which is exactly what Japan is. It's where four plates are coming together. And these are extremely active tectonic zones, and there are earthquakes that are overdue in fault zones where a lot of energy is locked up. And so it's really easy to do these events. And they were just practicing. They were just doing demos around the Pacific to see what they could do. It's really clear. I mean, it's all on the front page if you pay attention and you know what the right question is to ask.
Right. So taking this technology then, what are your conclusions about Fukushima and the standing waves that were turned into, quote, tsunamis on March 11th, 2011?
Well, I think I'll just quote NHK, the television network that first reported it. The very last sentence in that report is, quote, based on the collected data, researchers are now working on discovering how the giant tsunami was triggered, unquote. So even NHK is suspicious of how this over the record tsunami occurred.
Well, there have been leaked reports that that even during World War II, the U.S. and the Allies were investigating tsunamis as a weapon of war. And some of the theories that are coming out now in the alternative community are that nuclear weapons were used, some form of fourth generation or other nuclear weapons were used to generate a tsunami around Fukushima. Do you think that it was fourth generation nuclear weapons, or do you think it was HARP or some combination?
Well, a nuclear weapon would leave a radioactive signature, so I don't think they're using nuclear bombs to create earthquakes when they can do it so easily without being detected with transmissions of ultra-low frequency signals. And it's I don't think it's a nuclear weapon. I think they did it with HARP. And we have a number of lines of evidence. One is the heating anomalies, the infrared heating anomalies over the earthquake zone, almost the entire extent of Japan, length of Japan. And that was reported in the technology review by MIT with very, very large discussion about it, because the evidence and that information actually came from NASA. So the heat anomalies over the earthquake zone, that would be evidence of HARP. Also, there was other HARP evidence. I have a list of it. I don't have it in front of me right now, and I don't want to misquote it. But there is quite a lot of indication that it was HARP.
Right. Now, just to cover all of the bases, another theory that's kind of floating out there is that the famous NASA space plane is somehow involved in either triggering the earthquakes or coordinating something of the space-based attack, in that its orbit, somebody's calculated its orbit and found a coordination or a correlation between the orbit of the space plane being over Fukushima and the aftershock frequency. Do you think that there's any merit to that argument?
Well, the aftershocks are very normal. That always happens after a major earthquake for up to a year. So I doubt that the spacecraft has anything to do with it. They've done lots of earthquakes without any spacecraft around at all. I don't think it has anything to do with it.
Right, right. Now, you found that TEPCO has emitted a melt-through. And melt-through is kind of, in fact, I'm just coming across that word as are many people, and that is much more serious than a meltdown. Could you explain to us what a melt-through is as opposed to a meltdown?
TEPCO finally admitted in the first and second week of June 2011 that not only was there a total meltdown in 3 of the reactors, but there was a melt-through also, and that means it melts through right through all of the reactor layers and the containment vessel, and it drips down into the it even burns through the floor, melts through the floor, and it drips down into the basement room. And the government actually admitted that there was melted fuel now in the ground. So this is much, much, much more serious than just a meltdown where the fuel melts completely or partially. And of course, I knew the morning after the earthquake, that there was already a complete meltdown within about 6 hours. And TEPCO knew that too. They had to know it. And so what TEPCO and the government have been doing is saying they were doing computer simulations, and universities are saying they were doing computer simulations, and they estimate this and that, when it's just a way to cover up what they knew from the morning after, and that it's that they were completely melted down. And there have been, this is called a blackout. It's where there's no electricity to the power station, and they're not able to get the backup power generators working. And it was actually modeled on the Browns Ferry nuclear power plant in Alabama. They modeled it in the 1980s. And finally, I believe it was in late May, TEPCO held a press conference with a PowerPoint, and their own PowerPoint showed that they knew that there was a complete melt-through and meltdown within 6 hours after the earthquake. And that has been confirmed by TEPCO, and it's also in their report to the International Atomic Energy Agency, a 750-page report, which is being introduced to the IAEA on June the 20th, 2011. So the government and TEPCO have finally admitted it, and the IAEA is now getting involved. But it's a little too late. They really created this disaster. It was unnecessary. It could have been stopped right on the first day if they'd been honest about what happened.
Well, that's sort of an understatement if we have artificially created standing waves to simulate tsunamis, which caused a lot of this damage. And then with the Stuxnet virus, do you think that TEPCO, or at least their command and control, was in on this false flag, or do you think that they're just kind of plain dumb?
Oh, there are people who always know ahead of time. And I think that, they have to set up the cover-up ahead of time, too. For instance, in the news media, there is an overabundance of professors and experts from Tokyo University and Nagasaki University who are complicit in the cover-up. So this is academia. These are the academians, the academics, in cahoots with the government and with TEPCO to do the cover-up. And this is exactly what they did after the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombings of Japan in 1945 that ended World War II. And so this cover-up, this complicity, these layers of filters are not only involved the Japanese government, but even more so the American government. And we know that some documents that were jointly released on the contamination levels around Fukushima and northern Japan were jointly released. That was stamped on the map on the document, jointly released by the Japanese government and the U.S. government. But when that document was hacked and another layer was discovered underneath it, the only thing that was different, the map was the same, but the attribute to the author or the source on the under document, the original document said Department of Energy. So it's the Department of Energy that is running this response and telling TEPCO and the Japanese government what to do. And Dr. Stephen Chu and Dr. Kunin are both British petroleum agents who are now running the Department of Energy, and they managed the British petroleum disaster and messed that up. And now they're managing the Fukushima disaster, and they are certainly prolonging and increasing the exposure to in both incidents. So this is part of the depopulation agenda. And of course, remember, British Petroleum is owned by Queen Elizabeth, and Obama received his first campaign election money for his presidential race from the Crown, the City of London, and that was $500 million. And Dr. Stephen Chu received $500 million from BP as director of the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which is where the Manhattan Project was carried out or originated, and that was just before Obama appointed him as Secretary of Energy. So the Queen of England, British Petroleum, and the Department of Energy, their fingerprint is all over this disaster. And of course, that leads us straight to the bankers. And as I've mentioned in our last interview, the Tromsø, Norway HARP facility, which is owned by Britain, Sweden, Finland, Norway, China, and Japan, was conducting an experiment, a heating experiment of the ionosphere a week before the Fukushima disaster. So it's likely or probable or possible that it was Tromsø, Norway that carried out the Fukushima earthquake and tsunami disaster.
Right, and that Tromsø, Norway HARP facility is the same HARP facility that created the blue spiral over Oslo, Norway on November 9th, 2009, the night before Barack Obama's acceptance of the, quote, Nobel Peace Prize.
For war.
In which his speech only mentioned war, comma, and the fact that Barack Obama did not attend the famous Prince William blood wedding where the Fukushima event was sort of the workup to the blood wedding, and during his blood wedding was when the HARP tornadoes were unleashed all over the U.S., such that the radiation, which had been brought over by HARP, weather warfare capabilities, then could be rained out over all the central part of the U.S., thereby carrying out a blood-wetting radiation attack on the world, because the modus operandi of that sector, which some people call the Antichrist sector, is reversal. In other words, rather than wedding, which means new beginning, it's actually death.
It's an extinction.
Yeah.
It's the royal extinction.
Right. And so that then Barack Obama could, under the cover of that, stay in the U.S. and do his step and fetch it deception, as he did with BP, saying, oh, I guess I better get down there. In other words, these are all practiced deceivers and satanic black magicians. Yes. And that should be known, and it's been demonstrated, correct?
Yes.
Okay, good. I just want to put that on the record.
President Clinton introduced Obama as the exterminator.
Correct. He used the word executor.
Executor.
This is when right after Obama was elected president, then the former president came up and lifted up his hand and said, "This is your executor."
Right.
So these are all deep black magic sort of members of this satanic Masonic crew that's bringing you the one world government, the new world order, which is sort of the the Antichrist depopulation extermination experiment.
Yes, so now I just have a couple more things to wind up this topic.
Yeah.
And that is that Japan is illegally dumping all of this radioactive water into the ocean. It violates international law. But the foreshadowing event for this poisoning of the whole entire Pacific Ocean, and actually eventually the whole planet, is an experiment that was done at Sellafield in England when they dumped more radiation. They were the largest source of radiation pollution in the world. It was an experiment by the British to introduce it into the Atlantic current, the great conveyor belt that goes all the way into the Pacific, and it caused the deaths of 25 million Indian babies. And I wrote an article, people can read it on Namaste magazine. It's called Global Implications of Sellafield. Just do a search if you want to read it. And then the last thing I want to say...
But let me dump in here. If we have a Sellafield-like dumping of radiation into the ocean, and in Sellafield it resulted in the death of 25 million Indian babies because of the currents, knowing what you know of the currents from Fukushima, where is that radiation targeted and what's the anticipated effect?
Well, what it's going to do is it will be carried down through the Pacific. It will go past the Antarctic, around the Antarctic, and then it goes up into the Atlantic. So the coastlines of South America, Africa, that's in the southern hemisphere, Australia, and in the northern hemisphere, the shorelines will all be very, very contaminated with this radiation. Of course, it'll happen slowly, but nevertheless, all of this radiation is going to, it's a bullet that doesn't lose its lethality wherever it lands. If it's in a filter feeder on the ocean floor, like scallops or clams or abalones, or if it's in the air, for instance, the birds will eat contaminated fish and marine life, and also contaminated plants along the shoreline, and they fly around, and in their droppings, the radiation gets just spread everywhere. The whole Arctic is contaminated now from the Russian bomb tests, mostly from birds flying around and dropping radioactive droppings everywhere.
Right. So will this contamination be both on the Pacific coast of the Americas and on the Atlantic coast of the Americas?
It will be on the shorelines of all of the continents in the world, but the levels will be higher in the Pacific, the highest in the Pacific, and higher in the northern hemisphere than in the southern hemisphere.
What do you estimate to be the death levels if there were 25 million Indian babies?
This is going to be horrendous. This is going to be a major extinction in the biosphere. It's not just humans. And it's going to go up through the food chain into the highest level mammals and other animals. And in 50 years, the Earth will certainly not look like it does now, even 20 years.
Now, you and I have kind of a legal responsibility. I mean, supposedly I'm a judge on the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal, although that's been dormant for a long time, and some of the judges from the various countries are kind of waiting and wondering whether there was internal politics on that. Say the Islamic chief judge who went off on an anti-foreigner rampage that kind of shut it down because he was bribed by British money or something. What do you think? How can we begin to prosecute now that we know that it was, that it was Stuxnet virus, that it was BP? that we know the cast of characters, how can we begin to prosecute them legally? I mean, I'm speaking as a sworn judge on the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal, and you're an expert witness. Why don't we kick these people back in Malaysia and kick a little butt and bring Tun Mahathir Mohamad back into action and kind of wake him up?
Well, there's really, all of these tribunals are infiltrated. The only tribunal that was not infiltrated, that was really effective, was the 2003 International Criminal Tribunal for Afghanistan, and that was done by a grassroots Japanese group. So I think the Court of Public Opinion is really the only court we're going to have justice in, and that's a justice that was expressed, for instance, yesterday, June 13th, when the Italians voted no nuclear power, and Bulgaria is next to vote on it. The vote was 58% voted in Italy, and 90 or 95% voted no. It was overwhelming, and they expect the same response in Bulgaria. So if people do this all over the world, we have to have referendums, or the voice of the people will not be heard. But I want to go back to the information that I want to present today, the news, and we can talk about the tribunals another time. I'm happy to talk about it. But in view of the point that TEPCO and the government and the U.S. government were fully aware, the morning after the earthquake and tsunami, that there was a total meltdown, is pretty obvious. And just another part of the cover-up is that the Japanese government wants to cover the reactor buildings with polyester tents. It's either the government or TEPCO or both. And that's really interesting. That's just more cover-up, because these drones flying over the rubble and ruins of the reactors for the whole world to see has just been the best vivid advertisement against nuclear power that's even possible. And I doubt that Italy would have been able to even get 50% plus one vote to win that overwhelming referendum yesterday if the Fukushima disaster had not happened. So we have a huge opportunity now to stop all of this. Now, on April 12th, TEPCO, or NILU, it was the government and TEPCO really, released an estimate that 630,000 terabecquerels of radiation had been released into the atmosphere. That has been revised and increased. It's more than 730,000 terabecquerels released into the atmosphere. But this week also, the government and TEPCO suddenly announced that 720,000 terabecquerels have been released into the ocean by dumping that contaminated water from under the reactors into the ocean. And as I said, that violates international law. This is 10 times more radiation into the ocean than was detected after Chernobyl in the Black Sea. This is going to really impact the fishing catch in the Pacific and poison the absolutely whole Alaska fishing catch, which is a huge salmon run every summer. So people should be eating all the salmon they want now and stockpiling it because the catch this summer will not be safe to eat. Now, what's interesting is TEPCO's shares are down 87% since this accident. So the company is bankrupt. The only way it can survive is for the government to subsidize it, and they're probably going to do it. Now the UN is stepping in. Woods Hole Oceanographic Research Cruise is now operating offshore from Fukushima to investigate the radiation levels contaminating the ocean offshore from Fukushima. And what's interesting is that research cruise is funded by a CIA foundation, and it has an International Atomic Energy Agency scientist on board. So here's another part of the cover-up.
So it's all cover-up and greenwash.
Yes.
I'd like to just come in here with kind of 2 points. The first is, before we get away from it, to give an idea, you mentioned that there were 720,000 terabecquerels released into the ocean,
yes,
and 750,000 terabecquerels released. And as I understand it, a terabecquerel is 1 trillion times the safe ingest level, correct?
There is no safe level.
No, right. But I mean, the kind of, there's, i.e., what we're talking about here is 750 trillion doses, fatal doses of radiation that have been dumped into the air, and 720 trillion fatal doses that have been dumped into the ocean. I really want to nail that down. Is that correct?
Yes, but it could be even more deaths because a single alpha particle from one atom is cancer under the right conditions. So it's just a huge, enormous
right. But
amount
just to really broadcast it out.
Yes.
Is that we have almost 7 billion people on the planet.
Yes.
And 750 trillion, which is 1,000 billion, fatal doses were released into the atmosphere, and 720 trillion, and a trillion is 1,000 billion, were released into the ocean. And that's what occurred.
Well,
and okay, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Now
it's enough to exterminate all life on the planet.
Yeah, all life on the planet. Now let me make a second point. Last Saturday on CBC, which is kind of the official radio in Canada, it's like the Corporation for Public Broadcasting in the States. They were putting out that the official radiation report out of Hiroshima had stated that there was a generational study of the survivors of Hiroshima and their children and grandchildren, and that the children and the grandchildren actually were measured as healthier than the normal population. And so that the conclusion of the study was that not only did radiation not affect the local population, but that the population that was in Nagasaki and Hiroshima and had been hit by the bomb, that their progeny were actually healthier than the normal generation.
Who published that?
CBC. That's how they interpreted the study that was done by the official Japanese government.
Yes, I understand.
No, okay. Right. And so they didn't do any of the disclaimers, and they didn't do any of the debunking of that report.
Alfred. The reason they did that is because the Queen of England, all of the mineral rights in Canada, the entire Commonwealth. Canada is the largest uranium producer in. Queen Elizabeth wants to sell her uranium to Japan for power plant fuel. Otherwise, it's useless dust. And she also is part of a movement in the ruling elite to depopulate the planet. So, of course, Canadian broadcasting is going to produce a viewpoint like that. That confirms exactly who's on this agenda.
Right. And so I'm pointing it out so that people watching this broadcast who are skeptical really begin to get it, that the largest landowner on the planet, the throne of England, that owns 26% of the landmass of the planet. Is that correct, or is it more?
It's a huge amount, but I want to go on and finish
all
my
of the
report.
uranium in the planet.
Can I finish my report?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to talk about the Fukushima and Tokyo radiation levels now, which have not been available before. The reason there's a change in the estimation of the total amount of radiation released is because in that first estimate, they considered mostly just xenon and krypton, which bombard their gases, radioactive gases that bombard a population with gamma rays. Now, because of air filters, they've been measuring the radiation they take them out of cars and trucks in Tokyo and around the Fukushima region, and they are actually measuring much higher levels of radiation. That's why they're increasing the estimates. And these new added particles, they're called hot particles, are cesium, strontium-90, plutonium, uranium, cobalt-60, and other radionuclides that were not included in the estimates. Now, when you're inhaling or you're in an environment contaminated with hot particles, it's very, very hard to measure them because you can't measure them with a Geiger counter unless they're right there. This is a hot particle, and that little center is a plutonium particle. It's a nanoparticle, which is much, much smaller than, by hundreds of times, than a human hair. And these are the alpha particles that are emitted from a hot particle of plutonium in 2.5 days. Each of these alpha rays can cause cancer under the right conditions, and that cancer can be fatal. So you can see how dangerous these hot particles are. And in Tokyo, they know that people are inhaling 10 of those hot particles a day. And they know this from measuring the radiation on air filters between March 11th and May 1st. Now, what's even worse is in Seattle, they've also measured the hot particles, the radiation in air filters, and discovered that people in Seattle have been inhaling 5 particles a day. And that includes you, Alfred, in Vancouver.
And so what are the implications of we in the Seattle, Vancouver area inhaling 5 particles a day? What are the health implications?
Well, it's not good, but it's lung cancer and every other illness that is caused by free radicals. And that's a very long list, but the whole West Coast should have been evacuated. And in Fukushima, I mean, our prognosis is a lot better than Fukushima, because in Fukushima, the hot particles are 30 to 40 times higher than in Tokyo. So it's an extermination, Alfred. There's no other way to look at it.
But is it much different in the center of the U.S., which has now been hit with the blood-wetting heart tornadoes?
It's the contamination levels are lower than the Pacific coast, and the food supply for the entire Pacific coast has been contaminated. That is fresh fruit and produce that gets distributed all over the North American continent. But the West Coast will be much more devastated health-wise and contamination of the environment-wise than the Mid and East Coast. But the problem on the East Coast and the Mid-United States is that there is Corexit in the air and in the rain and in the hail that's coming down in those tornadoes. So it's the chemical synergy of Corexit combined with radiation that is a multiplier effect. And so this has all been completely planned. The dose is known. The synergistic effects of Corexit are known with radiation, and it's exactly right. Obama is the executioner.
And I recall a photograph of Prince Charles, the son of the Queen and the father of Prince William, on one of the levees during Katrina. This predates the BP Gulf of Mexico false flag operation, in his Scottish kilt with his Camilla consort, kind of as the conqueror, surveying his false flag. Is that correct?
Yes, that was a photo I found. I believe it was a week or two after the Katrina disaster, and I said, why is Prince Charles in New Orleans? Well, why did Queen Elizabeth go to the site of 9/11, the World Trade Center, and lay a wreath? And it's because criminals always love to visit the sites of their crimes.
Right. So we're dealing with genocidal psychopaths.
That's right.
Who are satanic, and okay. I'm just kind of, since I'm a war crimes judge.
Yes.
That's where my comments or questions are coming from.
Yes.
And you're a scientist, so
yes.
I'm just kind of noting this for the record.
Yes. I want to make one more mention, one more fact on the contamination, and that is that people in Japan are now reporting a metallic taste in their mouth. That was reported and already confirmed at 3 Mile Island, at Chernobyl, and also by patients going through radiation therapy for cancers. And this week I also had a report from former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, who has been in Libya during the bombing by NATO of Tripoli, and she also reported to me a metallic taste in her mouth, and other investigators who went to Libya to monitor the weapons and this NATO attack, unwarranted NATO attack on Libya. And so this metallic taste is a signature indicator of radioactivity.
Now, let me ask you, in your judgment, for those people who are on the west coast of the U.S. or in the U.S., given all this Corexit from the BP oil spill, where can, or in Canada, say in the North American continent, where would you advise relocate? And one is concerned about the Fukushima false flag radiation. Where should one relocate, or from that point of view?
I would advise people to go to the Southern Hemisphere. Fukushima is not over yet. We're 3 months into Fukushima, and they are farther and farther from a solution, not closer and closer. Now that they've admitted that the fuel has melted through the floorboard of the reactor buildings and is in the ground, it's still unpredictable. It's still a potentially catastrophic situation, and already the amount of radiation released is, we've learned this week, is twice as much as they admitted before. So what else are they hiding from us? I think people should get the hell out of the Northern Hemisphere. This is not over, and there are going to be more nuclear disasters, because nuclear power plants all over the northern hemisphere are built on active faults, as well as dams all over the United States. This wrecking the environment is not over, and we have a huge mass global starvation running at us at top speed. There's going to be a major starvation, food shortage, and it's already being reported in Europe. So people should go to the southern hemisphere, get out, go wherever you can. The equator has the lowest radiation levels because the heat makes the contaminated air rise very high into the atmosphere, and you have less rain out of it in the equatorial regions. Go live up in the mountains somewhere. Get away from the heat. But it's so bad, and the workers who have been working at the Fukushima plant all these months are over-contaminated. Some of them, one of them dropped dead in the middle of the day, just collapsed and died on the job a week or two ago. And what is happening now is that seniors, these are senior power plant workers who are retired, are now volunteering to become suicide seniors. These are senior engineers and plant workers in retirement who are offering to come out of retirement and work in Fukushima to save their country and the global population. And one senior was interviewed on a YouTube video clip. He said, "We are not kamikaze workers. We are patriots."
Now, what are some of the diseases and illnesses that children are starting to feel in the Fukushima area?
Well, the children in the Fukushima area have, the parents are reporting more asthma, they feel sick, their skin rashes, that's radiation exposure, and most disconcerting of all is diarrhea. Now, the lining of the intestine is almost the most sensitive part of the body to radiation. And now this reporting that these children have diarrhea is very bad. And we already know that the hot particles they're inhaling, it's 30 to 40% more than in Tokyo. So these children are being really sacrificed. It's an extermination of Japan's future, and TEPCO and the Japanese government are violating the Partial Test Ban Treaty, which requires at the levels measured on the ground in northern Japan that the whole top one-third of Japan should be evacuated. And these poor children are just being exterminated. Their parents are frantic. The teachers and parents went to the school playgrounds and removed the top 1 or 2 feet of soil and buried it under the playground, which migrates into the drinking water, but they put fresh uncontaminated soil into the playground to try to mediate or to lower the exposure rate of the children. The government is measuring the radiation levels 18 meters off the ground. That's 50 feet up in the air. They're not measuring the true radiation levels. You have to be right on the ground. You have to measure it within 2 inches of the ground. Actually, 3.5 inches.
So what do you say to these people that say, oh, the radiation is just a psyops? I mean, where are these people's heads?
It's a waste of time to even repeat it. This is a global extinction and extermination. It's not over. Fukushima is still extremely unstable. There's no answer to what to do about the melted fuel that's now in the ground. The NATO and a French team, as well as other professional advisors, have recommended blowing the whole 6 reactors into the ocean with the spent fuel. It's that cold ocean water is the only thing that is going to stop the fissioning, and there's no way to get the melted fuel out of the ground except to blow it all into the ocean and have submarines pick up the pieces. This is something has to be done. They're continuing to poison the whole planet.
Now, is the false flag still going on in the sense that is there anybody in authority that has stood up and said this is a false flag?
No one.
So this is kind of a 9/11 event where everybody's into the fairy tale. So more probably than not, no action is going to be taken because that's how it's set up.
Well, what's happening though within Japan is that the cover-up is crumbling. It's okay. Being attacked by very angry parents, by very angry academics, by very angry scientists, and by very angry even power plant workers or former power plant workers. So in Japan, the cover-up is being attacked by the angry voices of people who are top world-class scientists and academics, and also the parents and teachers dealing right in the trenches on the playground with the contamination and the lack of response from the government. That government, TEPCO, Stephen Chu, and Dr. Coonan, and BP and the Queen should all be charged and executed for this global disaster. There's no other way to convey the seriousness and the deliberateness of this carried out disaster. This absolutely is a false flag, and the fact that NHK is saying in their broadcast, their news broadcast, we'd like to begin investigating what triggered this tsunami, this unprecedented tsunami. So I think that because of the internet, we are able to discover on our own and from other sources what has really happened. And this is really going to mobilize the global community to attack nuclear power and all nuclear technologies.
Now, Leuren, we're almost at the end of the segment here. Do you have any other items on your report that you'd like to bring up or discuss?
I'd just like to emphasize again that this is an extremely, extremely, extremely still dangerous situation. Fukushima is very unstable. There's no solution to the melt through into the ground of the melted fuel. There are continual emissions. Now they're dumping more of the highly contaminated cooling water into the ocean. And we know that the IAEA representatives, the UN, have people over there monitoring this. And why aren't they helping? Why aren't they helping? Why haven't they helped for 3 months? They're over measuring the effects. They're not over preventing more effects. So I think it's pretty clear the whole global population should understand that we are on our own now, and only we, by each person taking some measure of action, can stop this. However small it is, Gandhi said, even a small lamp dispels the darkness.
Right. Well, I have a question from my end, and it's in the level of what we call upper theater. And that is that Prince William, who many experts say is now being groomed to be the king of the world under the one world government, which the New World Order will morph the United Nations into, because he has roots going back to the early Israel kings. And he's been photographed in Masonic poses with a lamb showing the hind clothed hoof of the lamb. sort of a black magic takeoff on Jesus holding a lamb. Well, Prince William is coming to Canada here and landing on June 30th, which is my soulmate's birthday. And the Queen set up the anointment of Barack Obama, who will be aiding in the morphing of the United Nations into the one world government in Westminster Hall on May 24th, which is my birthday. So we feel that this is a black magic targeting of our work here in exposing these agendas and trying to, because they operate on magic, trying to get to this, to the subconsciouses of people, so that by doing that, people don't pay attention to the higher signals coming out of these broadcasts, that these are cosmic crimes against humanity and against the ecology and against everything that is sacred, which is taking place. And I wondered if you could comment, because you know both my soulmate and myself, on the unusual circumstance that both of these events took place on my birthday, and now the invasion by Prince William into Canada on June 30th, although he's not daring even to come to British Columbia. He's just coming to Alberta.
I'm a scientist, and I report the news based on science. I don't do conjecture, and so I don't really have a comment about that. That's not what I cover.
Okay, but at least I got my news out. Thank you. Okay, well, this has been a very informative update, and we look forward to having you back in the future with your continued updates on what appears to be an increasingly dangerous attempted extinction of the human race. Thank you very much, Leuren.
Thank you.